Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the ROKER RAPPORT podcast in association with the Sunlun Community Soup Kitchen. It's Gav, back once again after Sunderland's epic win over Plymouth in the league, and I'm joined as always by my mate in Australia, Martin Wanless. Hi Martin.
Gav, how are you?
Oh, I'm tickly boo, mate. Having a good kip after our marathon, 24-hour marathon.
That's the main thing, eh?
Exactly, mate. And I'm also delighted to be joined by Nick Barnes. Hi Nick.
Morning. How's everybody?
It is morning. Well, it is for us.
Not for me.
It is for us. Martin, poor Martin. Yeah, Martin's. Good evening, Martin.
That's right.
We're all in high spirits, I guess, after Sunderland's win at the weekend. Nick, before we go through the action bit by bit, I just want to gather your thoughts on the sort of performance in general and the reaction of the players to a little bit of adversity in the second half and stuff. You know, it was a really good team effort, wasn't it? And an important 3 points in the context of the season when you consider how high up the table Plymouth are.
Yes, I think the first 15, 20 minutes was absolutely fantastic. I mean, I think that's some of the best football I've seen Sunderland play this season. You know, the confidence, I think the way in particular Pritchard, Dayaku, Broadhead linked up, the confidence they showed on the ball to sort of knock it about sweetly and take players on. I thought the first goal, that training ground manoeuvre, it's one of those, you know, I was talking to Dan Neil afterwards and saying, you know, Benno and I often during commentary are just head in our hands because the set pieces are so poor, and they have been, you know, consistently poor for Sunderland for most of the season. Then suddenly you get a corner like that worked absolutely perfectly. And you have to applaud, as Lee Johnson did afterwards, Jamie McAllister for working that one out and for it working in the manner that it did. And it caught Plymouth completely cold. But it also needed the players that were involved in it to get everything right, and they did.
It was interesting. I listened to Dan Neil's interview with the club, and he actually said it wasn't meant to come to him. He wasn't supposed to be the player in that position.
It was nearly perfect, but
I found hard to believe, if I'm honest, because it looked so well.
From where he was, from where he was standing to score, it looked as though it was intended for him. But you know, for actually to go through 2-3 players, reach him and still score, you know, with Plymouth sort of literally caught like rabbits in the headlights, I think, because it was early in the game and they just didn't expect it. You know, a manoeuvre like that did catch them cold. And then I was going to say Broadhead's finish as well. I mean, you don't get a cheekier finish than that. But, you know, that's a confidence thing. That's a player who's at the moment, you know, is at the top of his confidence and is looking like a very, very good player. So that, you know, together, and then they really should have been perhaps 3 or 4 up at half time, and that would have been the game blown out of the water, really, from Plymouth's point of view. But I think, you know, there's 2 things in the second half. One was that Plymouth was still in it at 2-0 and losing Lyndon Gooch and Sunderland having to change the system. That actually worked in Plymouth's favour. It gave them a real boost. And, you know, as we said in the commentary, the next goal was the big one. You know, when it's 2-0, if it's 2-1, Plymouth have got something to play for, something to hang on to. If it's 3-0, it's game over. So, you know, all credit to Plymouth. They didn't give up. They made a go of it. As you said, they're a good team. They weren't top of the table for so long because they were a bad team. It's because, you know, they're a team that are having a sort of mini slump at the minute. But I wouldn't be at all surprised now under Stephen Schumacher that they push on again and they're back up there in that ruck of teams fighting for the top 2.
Martin, you watched the game on the stream. I was there in person, but I mean, the atmosphere around the stadium was brilliant where I was stood. Do you feel like there's been a bit of a change in terms of the overall mood in the fan base? I mean, even after 4 games into this 6-game unbeaten run, it wasn't good. But this last couple of days, the win in midweek and then the one at the weekend, has it changed the mood? Do you feel like people are a little bit more on board with what's going on?
I think it has, and you know, you contrast the atmosphere yesterday from to the atmosphere last Saturday against Oxford, and that was, you know, it was only 7 days ago, and there was all doom and gloom around that result, and you know, despite a really good second half performance in that game, it was purely based on the result, wasn't it? That, you know, dropping the 2 points at home, coming into the game where we needed to ideally win. But I think, you know, that win against Morecambe on Tuesday, even though it wasn't the most sort of top-notch performance in terms of getting everything happening consistently for 90 minutes. Those goals that we scored on Tuesday, getting those 5, I think that's really made a big difference and given everybody a boost. And you go into the game against Plymouth yesterday, and it's another different type of test, isn't it? Which we obviously have passed with reasonably flying colours. I completely agree with Nick. Like that first half performance was probably the best of the season. And if you say it's the best of the season, it's probably the best in at least a year. It's almost, well, it is a year to the day since that Lincoln game. I think it was Lee Johnson's second league game in charge, wasn't it? Where we blew them away in the first half. And it's probably looking that far back to get as good a first half performance as we turned out yesterday.
I see you nodding there, Nick.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny enough because someone mentioned, I think it was Phil Smith yesterday in the Echo mentioned that Lincoln game and said the same as Martin. It was probably going back to that Lincoln game when as Martin says, they blew Lincoln out in the first half. I mean, I think going back, there have been spells in games when they played. You've had 5-10 minute spells, but I think a consistent sort of 45 minutes when. By their own admission, I was talking to the Plymouth Argyle commentary team at half time, and they both agreed. Look, Plymouth were lucky to still be in it at half time. They said it should have been at least 4-0, and and they had the chances, and they played some really nice football in that first 45 minutes and kept up that relentless sort of pressure on Plymouth. And all credit to Dayaku, who's he's been a sort of subject of some debate, I guess, over the last couple of weeks, because he was playing at what is his natural position? Well, it seems to be a winger, but he's been asked to play as a wing back, and you can clearly see in the game against Morecambe on Tuesday, and then again in the early stages of the game against Plymouth, Bailey Wright's consistently talking to Dayaku and trying to coach him through the game almost as to where he should be, what he should be doing. But credit to Dayaku, I think yesterday was his best game for Sunderland because he had an amazing first half just because of his his silky skills, if you like, but he kept going in the second half. He was asked to change wings, he was asked to do a different sort of job, but he kept at it, and all credit to him for that. So yeah, I agree. Going back to what Martin said about the Lincoln game, yeah, that probably is the best overall performance in a year, because I think you've got to give Sunderland credit for the way they handled Plymouth in the second half as well. Yeah, scrappy goal, but I did say before the game, funnily enough, when we were talking on the ROKER Report podcast yesterday morning, I said Plymouth will score because I think that's where Sunderland are at the moment. But I'm not concerned too much about conceding goals at this level because you'll score goals at this level. Sunderland will score goals, and I think we had this debate about in the Premier League. Yeah, keeping clean sheets is important because if you keep a clean sheet, if you're in the bottom half of the Premier League, it gives you the opportunity to win a game 1-0. Whereas in this league, it's not such a big pressure on keeping clean sheets because by the way that teams give the ball away and the chances they create, you will score goals. So I think yesterday I just sort of had that had the feeling that the Plymouth game will be one of those games where Plymouth, being the sort of team that they are, will probably score. But the way that Sunderland are set up at the minute and the way that Broadhead and Stewart, Pritchard are playing, I thought that there's goals in that team.
Perfectly imperfect is how I'd probably describe the sort of team defensive performance because, yeah, we were scrappy. Some of the clearances weren't great. We had to sort of defend with our backs to the walls at times, but I just think that we wanted it a little bit more than maybe they did, and that's why our defending was so important. I don't think I wouldn't say it was like proper old school clear cut defending, but we put our bodies on the line. I thought that the defenders in particular were good.
It's funny because there's one player that doesn't get, I don't think, enough credit for his defending is Ross Stewart. 9 times out of 10, the player that clears the ball in the penalty area when they're under pressure is Ross Stewart. Yeah. I just think that's another facet to his game. I think he's in there with everybody else. It's like you said, it's that team effort. And yeah, it wasn't perfect yesterday. It was scrappy, but everybody's doing a job. Just clear the lines, get the ball out, and they did that.
I was interested, Nick. Obviously, in the first half, we sort of played with 4 at the back, and Gooch was left back, and I think he's done tremendously well, by the way, over the past few weeks. I know he gave away that goal against Oxford, didn't he? Playing right back, but him playing at the left back, especially on Tuesday night, I think he's been he's been superb. But I was quite surprised. I think when you spoke to Lee Johnson after the game, he said he changed to a 3 at the back with Gooch coming off because that was the simplest thing for the players to switch to. And I was quite taken aback by that because I would have thought surely just putting Younger on at fullback or Alves on at fullback and maintaining that system, which had worked so well in the first half, that to me seems the simplest thing to do, rather than putting Diaku from one side to another, pulling him back to wing back and changing the whole shape of the team.
Well, it's interesting that about Younger and Alves. I think Alves particularly, because we spoke to Lee Johnson on Friday about Alves and the loan situation, and is he getting enough games? Will West Ham be happy enough with him because he's not really been involved that much? I think Lee Johnson's got, a trust issue is probably not the right way to describe it. There's something about Lee Johnson and Alves. I'm not quite sure he's 100% sure he'll do the job for him. And he's very much a manager who seems to think, right, those players out there on the pitch I trust. I know what they'll do and what they'll give me. And he's happier to stick with those. It's interesting when you look at his substitutions. It's only been Embleton and O'Brien. He hasn't risked, apart from 10 minutes cameo from Kimpioka, he hasn't risked anybody else from the bench. So he's sticking to that core of senior players. And so I think when he that whole back three, back four issue it's been quite entertaining actually. But it's as Lee Johnson was saying again yesterday, and then he talked about it on Friday as well. It was a lopsided 3, wasn't it? Which became a 4, and it effectively started with Bailey Wright right back, Lyndon Gooch left back. And it was interesting in the second half yesterday. You noticed early on when Diaku was playing on the right still, and suddenly there was this huge when Gooch had gone off. Doyle was leaving the left wing horribly exposed, and Ryan Broom was trying to exploit that. So what do? They bring Diaku over to the left to plug the gap. So that back 4-3 is very, very flexible. I mean, it seems to adapt as the game or the games go on. But he's very reliant on sticking to those same players to fill those roles. Winchester dropping back to right back yesterday, and Doyle then playing effectively left back. Flanagan, playing centre back and in the middle. It's very fluid. But well, what Gav said, it's the perfect imperfect. It's doing a job, and at the moment, with the way things are, and you've got to hope that Lyndon Gooch isn't out for 3 to 4 weeks, which was the fear that Lee Johnson expressed afterwards. Could be a scenario. Then, will we see Alves? Will we see Younger drafted in and see what they can offer?
I think what I'd heard was that Human Sirkin might be back either before or just after the Ipswich game.
Yeah.
So we might not have too long to wait.
It's certainly around about that time. I mean, I know that it's Sirkin, Hume, Evans are the 3 that are closest to coming back. And when we spoke to Lee Johnson, what was it, 2 weeks ago? When he gave a sort of timescale for each, it was the beginning of sort of mid-December, late December, that those 3 should be back. So Ipswich would be right to try and get 1, if not 2 of those 3 back.
It'll make a huge difference, Martin, won't it? I mean, we are getting by at the minute. You can't argue with being 6 games unbeaten. I just think it's great. But the fact we've done it without fullbacks is a credit to the team and is a credit to Lee Johnson, in my opinion. And I think we deserve a little bit more credit for the way we've sort of got by with what we've got. We've got, let's say, one player going off in that game against Plymouth in Gooch. We had to change 3 or 4 players around just to accommodate it because we simply don't have the numbers to cope. I know there was a left back on the bench, Kieran Dunn, but it's a big ask to bring a player on like that who's not really made a first team appearance and who might not actually be good enough yet to come on, play left wing back, isn't it? So I think they deserve a bit of credit.
Yeah, I mean, was it the Bradford game?
Oldham game, wasn't it? I think it was
Oldham. That's
Oldham
it. Oldham
game, wasn't it? He
Dunn, got a bit exposed in that game, and I think that will be, as you say, it will be a big risk in a game like Plymouth to bring Dunn on.
No, I think Gav, your point's absolutely spot on. I think we've had some ups and downs in terms of actual football performance over the course of the season, and there's some games that stand out as being up there, and other games that stand out as sort of being at those bottoms of the rung. But one thing you can't criticise the team for throughout the whole of the season, I don't think, is really like the desire to play for Lee Johnson. And I think there's never been a sense that you get that the team aren't playing for him. You know, that Cambridge game is a perfect example. Like, the conditions were horrendous. You're up against it all game, and like the mentality and, you know, the physical side, they really showed what they're made of. I think yesterday was another great example in the second half. Like, a team that isn't fully switched on mentally after conceding that goal goes to pieces. Next corner comes in, you know, is likely to be an equaliser, isn't it? So I think the team deserves an enormous amount of credit, not just for the football performances that they put in, but just the actual mental performances and physical performances. And, you know, we have had injuries and they've had to fill in, but in some respects, it might have made Lee Johnson's job a little bit easier, because you've got a core group. You know, as Nick said, your subs, O'Brien and Embleton, you're not really getting much more from that. So you've got 13 players who you're choosing from and working with.
Well, yeah, if you add Alves to it, I suppose.
Well, he's not getting in. He's not getting a look in, is he? So you've got that core.
That's a good point Martin makes about this group. When Lee Johnson was appointed, I spoke to an old friend of mine, Mervyn Day, who used to be chief scout at Bristol City when Lee Johnson was there. And I was sort of asking Merv about, you know, how Lee Johnson works, what's he like as a coach. And Merv said, look, he's a really good coach. He's a very, very good coach. But one thing he did say is he likes to work with a small group of players. He doesn't like to have to manage players not in the team. And I think that's becoming sort of evident now with the way he's managing this group with the injuries. He's sticking to that core 11 and the one or two senior players off the bench and working with them, if you like, in that small, tight-knit group. And yesterday, before the game, we saw four or five Sunderland fans who actually live in Bath and around Bristol. And I said, well, you'll obviously know Lee Johnson well, living that area. You know, as Sunderland fans, you'll still be very much across what Lee Johnson was doing at Bristol City. And they all agreed that everybody in that area is desperate for Lee Johnson to do well. They said they're absolutely, you know, Bristol City fans, even though he's gone and he's now at Sunderland, would love him, would just dearly love him to do well. Because he's sort of been, you know, while he was at Bristol City, for all the ups and downs and the streaky label, he did seem to, you know, fans seem to embrace him and what he's trying to do and what he does as a coach and a manager.
And sometimes those injuries can, as we say, kind of help a manager to a large extent, can't they? Because, you know, at the start of the season, Broadhead couldn't get a look into the team. Pritchard was on the bench for a long period of time. Now, if you fast forward to now, with Diaku, Pritchard and Broadhead up front with Stewart, if everybody's fit, you choose those four at the minute. So he's kind of hit on a...
Well, funny, yeah, because yesterday, was it yesterday or Friday, Scott Wilson and the Northern Echo said to Lee Johnson, well, it's funny how you've stumbled upon this team. And I'd actually said to Lee about the Cambridge game, I said, oh, you know, sometimes fate has it that Evans gets an injury in the warm-up, you have to change and bring another player in, and suddenly you've hit upon a formula that seems to be working. Well, Lee Johnson was a little bit chastened by the word stumbled from Scott, because he said, well, we didn't stumble on this. We've been working on this system for some time. You know, it takes a bit of practice. But you're right, because of the injuries, that system and that team has been forced upon him, and actually it's worked. I mean, and you can't argue against that, because I even think, you know, the Oxford game to a certain extent was taken out of context by a lot of people, assuming that, you know, you're going to roll Oxford over, forgetting that Oxford arguably were the form team in League One. I mean, they'd lost one game, and that was to Plymouth in 10. Now 11 with, you know, the game against Sunderland. And I think they won yesterday, didn't they, to beat MK Dons yesterday. So Oxford are on an incredible run at the minute. So, you know, a 1-1 draw against Oxford was by no means a bad result. And on another day, with a little bit of luck, maybe a tiny little bit more quality, they'd have beaten Oxford. So that shows you where they are and where they've been in this last sort of 10-day period.
It's interesting how we've coped without Aidan McGeady, isn't it, Nick?
And a lot of people have remarked on that, and a lot of fans I've spoken to saying, well, maybe this is the time, you know, maybe this is the time that McGeady is the player that now sort of takes a step back, and we don't become a team that's over-reliant mentally, if nothing else, on Aidan McGeady. I mean, because to a degree over the last couple of seasons, there's been this sort of mental crutch that McGeady's going to get Sunderland out of trouble. And I think that was, a dangerous place to go, to be honest, over the last couple of seasons, because of his age, because he's definitely had a dip in form this season. I think now they've learned how to play without him. Look, great if he's in the squad and if he can come off the bench in games towards the end of the season, fantastic. But I just don't think we need to be looking and saying McGeady's the go-to player that's going to get us out of League One. Because I think this team's proving that it can get out of League One by itself at the minute in terms of the way that it's playing and the players that are developing through that team, just because they're getting minutes.
The way Pritchard stepped up as well is amazing, really. He sort of stepped into that McGeady role in the team, hasn't he, as the experienced creative player who everything runs through, and probably, obviously, because he's younger and fitter and a little bit quicker, has improved us measurably. I think if any one player has improved more than the rest of his teammates over this sort of last 6-game period, it's got to be Alex Pritchard for me.
Well, I mean, again, Lee Johnson said, didn't he, after the game yesterday, we're now seeing why someone paid £14 million for him. Because that's the player now that Sunderland thought they bought in the summer. And as Alex Pritchard's talked about, you can't legislate for something like COVID, which sort of wiped him out in the summer. And it's taken him this long to get back to his best. And now again, because he's playing regularly, he started the last 4 or 5 games now. He's getting into his stride. He's getting match fitness, and he's a busy bee. He's buzzing everywhere. He's just fantastic to watch, and you can see again there's a player that's just thriving on the confidence now of being able to contribute and play and play the minutes. And yeah, I mean, it's again something that's just sort of come together just at the right time, if you like.
Adam Hegarty's asked on Twitter, we look so much better playing with a high tempo and a high press from the off yesterday, which makes you wonder why we stopped doing it in recent weeks. Was it a tactical change or a personnel/confidence issue? Interesting that, because I would say confidence is the big one, right? I mean, when you've lost 4 games, it is difficult to play with a zip in your step. We're 6 unbeaten, of course we're going to play like that.
I think it's players don't want to take responsibility, do they? This old issue of when you're in a slump and when you're making, if you're losing games or you're not playing as well as you had been, players don't like to they don't want to be the ones that give the ball away. They don't want to be the ones that shoot from 25 yards and it goes over. And then that it sort of almost sort of permeates the team. Then, one player starts not wanting to take responsibility, then the player next to him doesn't want to take responsibility, and it's sort of it that shifts through the team. And I think yesterday was a fine example where now, because players are prepared to have a go, and Dayaku's one, example of that. He's more than happy to try and push it through a defender's legs, and take a player on. And a month ago, would he have done? Would we have seen the old Sunderland? You face a player, turn, play it back, go back to the centre halves, start again. Now you're seeing Broadhead, Pritchard, Dayaku, Stewart. They're all prepared to take players on again and take chances. And I think that again is this confidence issue. When you're winning games 5-0, you're digging out a result like yesterday. Players suddenly are prepared to take on responsibility again.
We haven't really talked about the second goal, Martin, but all of those players involved, we've talked about to varying degrees. The ball from Pritchard to
Dayaku
was to Dayaku, wasn't it? Unbelievable pass. Then Dayaku, as Nick just said, shows confidence to take his man on, turns him inside out, puts a lovely ball into feet, and then Broadhead's finish. I mean, anyone who's heard Frankie's commentary on the stream, I saw the video going round. On Twitter, but it's about sums it up. It's about the noise I made, I think, when I was in the ground. It was nice to watch, wasn't it, Martin?
Oh, it was beautiful. Beautiful move, beautiful football, and just real talent on show from all 3 of them. And, it's not only Broadhead's finish, but it's also his run to make the angle for the pass from Dayaku. And, the finish is exceptional. And I think, Broadhead's another one who we're seeing, getting 4 or 5 games in the team, forming relationships and partnerships with the other attackers around him, figuring out how each of them play, figuring out where they like to play the ball, figuring out how they like to move. And there's no surprise that those, all of the players are getting a bit better by having those games on the game time with each other. And it's going to take a few games. And I think there's certain people or certain elements of all football fans, I guess, from any club, who are really quick to write players off after a bad performance or a bad cameo appearance or something like that. But Diaku is a prime example. It's a young lad coming from a foreign country. He's barely played at first team level before, if ever, before coming here.
Not for a regular run, anyways.
Well,
not for a regular run of games.
He might have had a few sub appearances here or there, but he's never actually been part of a first choice 13, 14, 15 man squad, has he? So he's coming in playing football for the first time properly at professional level. He's not going to be performing at 100% straight away. He's going to take, he might take 3-6 months to really settle in. And you've got to give those players time, because the ceiling that they have, we don't know where it is. It could be right up here, it could be down there, but we don't know. And we're seeing performances improve week by week now. And we'll have some ups and downs along the way, but that course is going up. And Broadhead's a great example. He's had a look, and Broadhead's going to be 24, I think, in April. And he's barely played first team football in his career. I think he's still in 18, 19 appearances. So for him, this is a whole new experience as well. So he's not going to be performing at those sort of maximum levels now, but he's getting there. And I tell you what, he could be an absolute star. I would be going all out to sign him in January if it's at all possible, because he is class.
Did you hear what Tom White said on the Twitter space before the game that he did with Rich? Because Tom White from Sky Sports News was on, and he was talking about Broadhead's deal with Everton. And it was his understanding that Everton have basically re-signed him just because when they come to sell him, they want to insert a sell-on clause in there, so maybe down the line he does well. Yeah. They could make a couple of quid off him. They have no intention of keeping Nathan Broadhead. He was actually going to be released. But one thing Tom said, which was more about his style of play, which really had me watching Broadhead differently during the game, was that he said, this sounds weird, but look at the way he runs and carries himself around the pitch. He doesn't look like a League One striker. No. He's very different. And that made me watch Broadhead slightly differently during the game. I was sort of like watching the way he moves, the way he sort of carries himself and runs. And I mean, on the pubcast that we did live on Twitter, I said that I think Nathan Broadhead is probably one of the most, and people shouldn't take this wrong, because I know we've had some fantastic strikers at Sunderland in the Premier League, but as a complete forward goes, we can't have had many more complete forwards who can do everything. Good in the air, he's quick, he's got good feet, he's two-footed, good finisher from range. He can do close range finishing, as we saw yesterday. He can play out on the wing. He can play as a 10. There can't have been more complete forwards than him at this club in recent years, Nick.
No, and I think I was wondering yesterday, I mean, like you watching him and the ground he's covering. I mean, heaven knows how many kilometres he's covered during a match, because he's dropping deep. As often as not, you'd look down and think, oh, is that Gooch? Oh, no, it's Broadhead. He was dropping right back down into left-back position, into midfield. He's making, sprints from his own penalty area to take the ball back up into the opposition half and sort of foraging runs into the penalty area. And I mean, as to his future, I mean, I think Marco Gabbiadini was saying the other week that, Broadhead's one that is going to be very, very interesting, because, as you say, Everton aren't going to keep him. The age that he is now, if they were, that would have, we'd have known a long time ago that Everton, he was in their sort of in their plans. He's not. I mean, so he's going to be available for someone next season. And I think if Sunderland do go up, they'd have a very, very good chance of keeping and of signing him, because he's got a decision to make. He's got a career now to make in football. It's going to be away from Everton. And so he's got to decide himself where that career is going to be. And if Sunderland can, if they can embrace him and they can nurture him and make him feel like this is the club to be at because of the support they get, the football that they're playing, And if they make him, like you said, Gav, central to their plans as a centre forward with Ross Stewart, then, he could have a very, very big future at Sunderland.
But what's interesting is that he turned down championship moves to come here anyways. So I think that stands us in very good stead. If he's playing regular football here and enjoying himself and scoring goals, Martin, I think we're in a good position regardless. I think he does probably see himself playing at the highest level if he can. He's done very well for himself to date as a youth player. But I think if Sunderland want him badly enough, I think we would get him.
Well, I think it's there's another aspect to this as well, isn't it? And that's his relationship with the coaching staff and with Lee Johnson. And if he feels that Lee Johnson is getting the best out of him and he's a good manager to guide the next phase of his career, that's a massive thing when he has a decision to make, because he'll have had 6 months, 12 months of working with Johnson. And I think that's another thing that's often overlooked when people, we lose one game and everyone goes, Johnson out. And you've got all of these other aspects in the club, the relationships that the individual players have with the head coach, which, from the outside looking in, seem to be strong, seem to be productive, and seem to be solid. And you end up, potentially risking all of these things with that uncertainty at management level as well. So the more stable we can be at the football department level off the field, the better chance we have of keeping players like Nathan Broadhead, if the opportunity arises to sign him, the better chances that we have of keeping, people like Sirkin, if he has a good season and people are after him, the better chance we have of Callum Doyle coming back next season on a year's loan. So you've got all of this stability aspect, which can have a knock-on effect to the personnel and be hugely influential in where players actually see their futures.
We'll talk a little bit about the goal we conceded. I know Nick touched on it. Is there anything we could have done better there? I noticed that a few people commented on Tom Flanagan's sort of role in that, and I said on the podcast we did live on Twitter after the game that I felt maybe the goalkeeper, if he wanted to come out and clatter a few people to get his hands on it, he probably could have. Is that fair, Nick?
I think Benno touched on it in the game yesterday. Hoffman's got to command his area, and in those situations, funny enough, you go back to the Cambridge game and he dealt with it fantastically. That they were going through that same scenario every 3 or 4 minutes because Cambridge were racking up corners, and what they were trying to do was exactly what Sunderland had done to score, and that was swing it right underneath the crossbar and put pressure on Hoffman, and he dealt with it really well. And so to a degree, it sort of surprised me yesterday he didn't do as well with that corner. But the point being, he's got to be dominant in that position. He's got to come out. He's got to claim that ball. And, you can see the way that teams now are adopting this sort of pile everybody into the 6-yard box and basically sandwich the goalkeeper. Well, it's seeming the referees aren't giving goalkeepers much protection in that situation. The referee yesterday, look, that's another story altogether. But, he should have, I think Hoffman should really have taken control there. Knowing that was probably what Plymouth were going to do. So it's a shame. Because I think Hoffman's a good keeper and he's proved, he's pulled off some, outstanding saves, and he's clearly a player that's going to develop and be a big player for someone, whether it's Sunderland or whether it's someone back in Germany. But that in that instance, we're back to the old sort of bullying scenario, if you like. That's sort of maybe a little bit of an Achilles heel for Sunderland. They don't deal with that physicality sometimes as well as they perhaps should do.
I think that word develop is probably the right one. I think with Hoffman, and we've just talked about Diaku in similar vein, he is a young player who hasn't had a lot of proper first team football with rugged, tough defenders, and you can tell that. And the way I put it yesterday was sort of like, well, if he was good at everything, he wouldn't be in League One right now. So you sort of have to take the rough with the smooth. I think if you look at the other goalkeeping options that we've got, Patterson is probably more similar to Hoffman than Burge is, but he's still a little bit further back in his development. But Burge is not particularly good at anything. He's sort of all right at everything. He's not like there isn't something I could pick at in Burge's game and say he's really strong at that. And then you look even further back than that at sort of John McLaughlin, who was a very good shot stopper, very good at commanding his area, but poor with his feet. Hoffman's brilliant with his feet. I think we saw a stat during the week from the game on Tuesday that Hoffman never made a single goal kick, clearance, pass beyond the halfway line on Tuesday night, which probably has never happened before. I'd be amazed if that's ever happened where a Sunderland goalkeeper's played 90 minutes. So, we're obviously adapting with the way he can play, adapting our own play, the way we play out from the back and stuff. And I think you've just got to, again, just take the rough with the smooth with him. And I think in time, as he becomes more experienced and more confident and just gets older, you've got to wait for him to get those years under his belt. He will become better at commanding his area. But the important thing is that with every player at this level, I say pretty much every player at this level, is that they're a League One player for a reason, because they're not particularly brilliant at everything, or they're not consistent. And that always makes me sort of temper my expectations slightly when it comes to players, Hoffman being one of them. But I'm not gonna sort of lose any sleep over the way he think the things he should have done better.
I think with Hoffman though as well, you've got to remember that I think before that goal was conceded, he'd made 2 or 3 really good saves to keep the score down beforehand anyway. So you've kind of got to take it as a whole package, and it's one of those that it's not really a full-on mistake, is it? He was kind of boxed in. He probably should have done better. But it wasn't an error where he's let it slip through his fingers or under his body or anything like that.
I just think a more experienced goalkeeper probably would have just cleared a couple of players out.
Well,
and been a bit more aggressive. But that's sort of like something you've got to have within you. And right now he doesn't. So,
how old is he? 20, 22, 21?
Yeah, exactly. Very young.
He's very, very young for a keeper. So, again, first season of playing proper pro football, playing in a tough physical league. He's going to have those things, and he'll be, his development will be so much better for it.
I mean, that's the point Lee Johnson made about all these players when they were signed. He said, these are young players that will make mistakes. He said, that's because that's where we are. If they were Premier League players, they wouldn't be here. They're here because they're going to develop and make mistakes here. But they'll learn from them. I mean, I think that's true of Doyle. I think it's true of Sirkin. And it's certainly true of Hoffman as well. He's only going to get better as every game that he plays, and he will make mistakes. He will, learn from those mistakes. And come back to what I said earlier, and as you said, Martin, it's League One. They're going to concede goals. There's no question. You're not going to play at this level and not concede goals in games, because that's what teams do at this level. However good they are. And you've just got to, I think, accept that and then say, right, well, as a team, we will, as I said earlier, score goals, and we've been talking about Broadhead, and we talked about Stewart, and we talked about Dayaku and Pritchard as an offensive unit. Fantastic. Well, at the other end, on the whole, there have been some good defensive performances as well, but with a back four, which has got an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old, a midfielder playing at right back, and so on, and a very young goalkeeper. So mistakes and goals are almost inevitable.
So we look at the league table, and Sunderland are joint second with Wigan. We're only below them on goal difference. Importantly, though, we've played 21 games. We've got 42 points. That's the 2 points per game mark that everybody talks about as being vital for a team getting promoted. And Michael Bowers has asked you, Nick, how vital do you think that it is that we stay at or above 2 points per game across the season?
I think they will. I mean, we've reached the halfway mark pretty much, and they're on that target. And last year, Hull and Peterborough didn't reach 90 points, and so Sunderland are set at the moment the way they're going to reach the 90 points plus, which would see them in the top two on that basis. And it's interesting looking back last season at Hull and Peterborough's sort of runs from December through to the end of the season. Both of them lost 5 games. Now I'm not sure at the moment. You look at the way Sunderland are playing. Will they lose 5 more games this season? Being optimistic, I'm not sure that they will. I think they will lose games. That's a given. But I'm not sure they're going to lose 5 now with the players they've got coming back, with January coming in and the possibility of looking to strengthen those certain areas that clearly need some sort of strengthening. I think Sunderland are in a very strong position to maintain that 2 points a game average, and I feel quite optimistic about that. I think, for the last season at this stage, Hull in December won 1 game in 5. They lost 4 out of 5 games. Well, Sunderland haven't done anything like that. They had that Rotherham and Sheffield Wednesday blip, and there were reasons. I think you can isolate those 2 games, and Rotherham was on the back of Queen's Park Rangers. Sheffield Wednesday was a strange one, bearing in mind the amount of possession that Sunderland had, but just couldn't score. But then they've got back into their stride, if you like, and I think on the basis of that, I just don't see them now slipping up that often. They will, but not often. I think towards the end of the season.
Are you happy looking at the table, Martin? Where we are?
Oh, I think you've got to be, haven't you? And we did a roundtable piece on the site at the start of December about how many points would be the right number of points that we needed throughout the month of December. And I think I'd said getting to that, if we got to the end of December on that 2 point a game mark, bearing in mind the players we had to come back from injury, bearing in mind this investment that you hope will come in January, that's a hell of a strong position to be in come the end of the year. And I think, again, I always keep going back to the start of the season. If we'd been offered this at the start of the season, would we have happily taken it? And I absolutely would. To be tracking on that many points with the number of young players we had coming into the squad, and then you factor in the injuries that we've had, which we obviously couldn't foretell, but we've had an awful lot of injuries that you perhaps wouldn't expect to have that number. I think we've done really well. If you look at the whole season in context, yeah, there's been ups and downs as we talked about, but whole season in context, you've got to be happy with it. I'm happy with it anyway.
Yeah. Week off, Nick. I think it's much needed, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think going back to this whole point about this is a team that at the minute is playing without any impact subs. I don't think you can necessarily call Embleton or O'Brien an impact substitute, players that necessarily can change a game. So you're playing, you're winning this week that's just gone, for instance. You've got 7 points out of 9 playing with 11 players basically. Whereas if you've got the players that are injured coming back in that can change a game in the last 15, 20 minutes, that's another whole new angle to where Sunderland are going in the second half of the season. So, but going back to the week off, I think it's needed. I think, it's just to mentally, if anything else, just suddenly think, right, hang on, let's take stock. Big game against Ipswich coming up at the weekend. Arsenal's a free hit. It's one, I said to Dan Neil yesterday, it's like a Christmas present for the players, isn't it? Just the opportunity to go and play at a Premier League club and just sort of take the pressures of the league off you for a night and enjoy it.
It's interesting you mentioned that, actually, because Johnny Robbs asked how seriously you think we should take that particular game, given how packed the Christmas schedule is, all the travelling, the importance of the league results. So what do we do? Because, it's not like you can throw a kids' team in against Arsenal, but what do we do? It's a bit weird,
you can't, and it's not a huge amount you can do, but play quite a strong team and probably play the team he's playing, with maybe 1 or 2 youngsters like Alves or whatever. They don't want to go. Lee Johnson, look, he hates losing. And the last thing anybody wants is to see Sunderland go to Arsenal and get absolutely drubbed. So, I think he will go there and field a respectably strong team. And the players themselves want to do themselves justice there. And I think the other side of it is that Arsenal too, they're not going to field a strong team because of their schedule and because of the pressure that Arteta's under to perform, to win something. And so that I think on both levels, you can see it being a competitive game, actually. And Sunderland are quitting themselves well.
It was interesting, Nick. I looked at the team they played in the last round and it was strong, but you bang on. Like, they've got 3 games. I think they're playing Man City at the end of that run. So they've got 2. I think they've got Norwich. I can't remember who the other game is. I think it's somebody else who's down there. But then they've got Man City at the end of the run. It's sort of like, can they really afford to play a strong team when they've got such an important game at the end of it? I don't think they can. So, we'll preview the Arsenal game in a little bit more detail as we get closer to it. But as things stand, then Sunderland in a decent position, aren't we, Nick? And it's a good chance to sort of reflect. Like I said, we've got a week off. We've got another huge game next weekend. I don't know if Ipswich appointed a manager yet.
No, it's interesting. But again, look, they're clearly not a bad team. And I just thought, looking at the players they brought in, when they were here the other week, man for man, they've got good players. There's no question.
Yeah.
I mean, they should be doing better than they actually are at the moment. But I think looking at the schedule that's coming up, Ipswich is the big one because it's away from home. I think it's undoubtedly going to be a very tough game. But then you've got Doncaster. Again, you should go to Doncaster. The form that you're showing, you should win at Doncaster. Then you've got 2 home games, and the home form is so strong that you think, right, you can only look forward to that. So I'm sort of optimistic about this sort of next 3 games, if you like. If you're taking it in 3-game chunks all the time, I'm looking at these next 4 games, thinking actually, it's a good run. I mean, if you'd offered me those fixtures, I wouldn't have said no. I'd have said, yeah, okay, that's great. Let's go for it.
Yeah, well, that's a good place to end it. Thanks for joining us, Martin, as always.
No problem.
And Nick, thank you very much. I think Nick might have just dropped by accident.
No, sorry, I just dropped down.
You dropped out nearly too early, Nick. Thanks, Nick. Thanks for joining us, mate. Really appreciate your time. You gave us lots of time this weekend, actually. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Everybody listening, can you do us a favour? Just head across to the fundraiser page if you haven't already donated, of course. You might want to put even more in, I don't know. But yeah, head across to the donation page that we've got for the Christmas fundraiser for the Sunlun Community Soup Kitchen. As I speak, we're heading towards 45 grand. Hopefully by the time this pod drops, we might even be over that. You never know. But yeah, if you haven't already donated, please consider doing so. It's going to a good place. And we will be back before the Ipswich game with another podcast. And head to the ROKER Report website before the game every day this week. Plenty of good stuff coming up. We'll catch you later. Thank you very much.